Good morning. I'm Garry Jacobs, president of the World Academy of Art and Science, which is we're collaborating with the United Nations Trust Fund on Human Security on this global campaign, HS4A. For those of you who have been attending CES over the last years, you may recognize this is not the first time we're here. CTA first invited us 2 years ago in 2023, first time in 50 years of the history of CES that a theme was adopted for the CES show to really focus on the very important message of the tremendous opportunities and tremendous responsibilities of technology for addressing the challenges that we face, that humanity faces today. We were invited back last year for a second year, and this is the third, and we're delighted to be here. And this year we're going really to look at what some of those opportunities are and how important it is for the future of humanity that members of this association and those around the world take up this opportunity. Yesterday, for those of you who had the opportunity, we had a parallel session conducted by our colleague Ketan Patel on digital health and the role and tremendous potential of digital health for the future, which is many members of the association already know about it. Today we're talking about education. Education at the global level. What is the need, why it is so important, and what does it have to do with members of this industry? And why should we be coming to CES to talk about this huge global potential and this huge global need? And it's a good balance between health and education. We may not think about it, but half the challenge, at least, of health is to deal with the problems after we've created them. The other half of the challenge is to educate the human race to avoid those problems in the first place, but have the knowledge to know how we should be taking care of ourselves and taking care of our community, our families, and our communities. So this we see is really a counterpart to where we started yesterday. Today is also particularly significant for us because for the third time in 3 years, our partner organization, Force for Good, is also releasing a very important report on technology as a force for good. This, I think, is the 8th report on capital as a force for good and technology as a force for good. This is a report that looks at the macro level of the challenges confronting humanity in all sectors, food and health and environment, and political stability and peace and everything. And we're here to talk about the big picture because we think companies that are really looking to the future need to know the big picture of where the world is and where it's going and what the challenges are we face, and most importantly, what we can do about this. The challenges, that's what technology is all about, fixing problems, inventing new solutions to them. So I'd encourage you all who don't already know about it. This is the actual day of the release of the report. It's going to the press now. But to take a look at forcegood.org, which is the Force for Good website, where you'll find the latest report available. And I'd really encourage you, it's an exciting read to broaden our perspective. Now, coming to our particular topic here, we're talking about a $3 trillion challenge in education. That maybe requires a little explanation before we get into the panel. In the last 20 years, the number of students globally in higher education has doubled from about 100 million to 200 million. But if you look at the projections, if we really want to meet the education, higher education, I'm just speaking of, higher education around the world, we need to double it again, or maybe even 1.5 times, which means imagine in 20 years having to create capacity, educational capacity, for another 200 to 300 million people. Now we're talking about this $3 trillion challenge. The $3 trillion challenge won't get us to meet the needs of all those 300 million people. It'll, for each 100 million additional student capacity we want, it's going to cost $3 trillion in infrastructure, and another $2 to $3 trillion annually in operating cost if, and this is the big question, if we continue to do it the way we're doing it now. And all the figures suggest it's going to be really difficult to get that money. Today, in the last 20 years, education in India, in the US, our per capita, our enrollment of students has gone from 60% of the school-age population to 80%. We're in the leadership of the world, not just the US, but Europe and Canada as well. The average for the world, though, for the 8 billion plus people, is only 40%. So they would have to double their level of educational saturation in order to catch up with the developed countries. And there are a lot of countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where it's not even 10%. India is about 27%. So when we're talking about a challenge, we're talking about a challenge for all humanity. And just to bring it home a little more, and I'm going to close with that, the problems we face today cannot be solved by any country by itself. We cannot solve the climate problem or the environmental problem ourselves. We depend on the actions of all the countries in the world to solve these problems, which means we depend on the education and the workforces of all the countries of the world too. So this has everything to do with us. Whether we need the education or we need to help find solutions for the rest of the world. And the message, as I'm sure you'll hear over and over in our panel, is that this is not only a challenge, but a great opportunity. And we're here to explore that opportunity and the role technology can play in it. We have a wonderful panel, and I want to turn it over to our speakers, very experienced speakers looking from different dimensions at this problem. And I'm going to start just by mentioning their names. You have their information on the web and all, and they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves. The first speaker will be Amanda Ellis. She's a former ambassador to the UN from New Zealand. She is an executive director at Arizona State University of their global sustainability project called Futures Laboratory. Sorry, I missed it sometimes. But with rich experience, and she'll be talking to you about what we're doing and what they're doing at ASU as well. Our second speaker, Ralph Wolff, who's the newly elected president of the World University Consortium. He'll tell you something about that. Ralph has long history in education. He headed the organization which was responsible for certifying, accrediting top universities in the western part of the United States over more than a 10-year period, and he works with universities and organizations around the world. He knows what the problems of education are, and he knows what it would take to change the system and deliver it. And our third speaker is Dr. Unique Morris-Hughes, who is a Secretary of Labor in the government of Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, and who's responsible for the skilling of our workforce. And her experience has got a rich experience in when we talk about education, we're not talking about diplomas. We're talking about giving each person the skills and knowledge they need to make an active contribution to the community and for the success of their own lives. So with this, we're going to start our panel, and I'd like to turn it over first to Amanda. Tell us why this is so important, and what does this have to do with meeting the challenges of the world? Amanda?
Well, thank you so much, Garry, and tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to all of you in Māori, the indigenous language of Aotearoa, New Zealand, where I'm from. And that greeting really encapsulates the importance of us all being one. We are one people and one planet. And that's the concept that underlies human security for all. and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal Agenda. So I was ambassador to the United Nations at the time when we negotiated what became the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And this is the first time that we as a planet, every single one of us, has had a globally agreed development agenda. Now, I can give you a bit of an insight on how difficult the negotiations were. And I'm very sad to tell you that things like gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls, which you would think would be a no-brainer, given women have only 2/3 of the rights of our male counterparts globally, were really contentious. But goal number 4, education, was absolutely unanimous for all of the reasons that Garry mentioned. Did you know that 7 in 10 children in the developing world is unable to read a basic text? So we have a massive problem, particularly in the developing world, which is a massive opportunity for those of you who are in edtech businesses and those of you who are thinking about the future of the workforce. And interestingly, just to give you the context of where we are with the Sustainable Development Goals, we know that we have an interconnected world. We're all together on this one little blue dot. The pollution that I put out where I live in Honolulu is going to impact somebody in India where Garry is. So we really need to be thinking about ourselves as one planet. And that's the concept behind the Sustainable Development Goals and this global agenda, which includes environment and social and governance. Goal 16 is all about peace, justice, and proper institutions that, of course, set the policies for you to operate in as business leaders. Human security for all is this idea that we are all intertwined. And back in 1994, when the UN came up with this concept, there were 7 pillars. And I am so excited, even though this is my first time at CES, to know that technology last year became the 8th pillar. So there's a total recognition within this global development agenda that technology has an absolutely key role to play. Now, Garry mentioned I'm at Arizona State University with an amazing philanthropist, Julie Wrigley, who had the insight to set up the first school of sustainability in the world 20 years ago. Now, of course, they're proliferating and there are thousands. This is such an important part of the future workforce and such an important part of, in fact, how our students are learning at ASU. I was really keen on biology and science as a little girl growing up at the bottom of the South Island of New Zealand. But I went to a girls' school and it wasn't important for girls to learn science. So we had the sewing teacher. And there just wasn't the ability to learn in the way that there is now. You can imagine my excitement when I was in the lab at ASU where our first-year students learn biology through AI. And we have a partnership with Dreamscape run by Walter Parks of Men in Black fame. And so first-year biology students are in the lab with a personalized approach to learning science. So you can imagine how different that is to the way I began learning. Similarly with language, we know that AI is now making it possible to translate and to learn in any language, and similarly for your workforces. That super exciting for me. I love languages and I speak French fluently, but I had to learn through a boring old grammar book. Now you can go on Duolingo and have a personalized AI program available. So just to finish, we have a big partnership with OpenAI. ASU is the first university to have an AI Innovation Challenge, and I'll tell you more about that in the second round. But just to leave you with a couple of thoughts, even in Europe, where we have the money and we have the commitment to technology, we have only 15% of the skill set required to meet the challenges of the 21st century and the Sustainable Development Goals. So AI is going to play an absolutely critical role in upskilling the future workforce to be able to meet these gaps and challenges. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That statistic is really startling, that if I understood you correctly, that in order to meet the challenges facing humanity, if that's true of the educated populations, what about the rest of the world? We only have 15% of the skills we need, the skilled people we need. The opportunities for our future workers, for our youth, are going to be in skills that we don't have in the workforce everywhere. So we've got to be doing something more and different than we are now. That's really incredible. Ralph, please go ahead and tell us why it's not just enough that we continue business as usual or do it the way we've been doing it up till now.
Glad to. Greetings, everyone. And I'd like to invite you to consider what we're talking about and use your creativity to work to address these problems. And as the new president of the World University Consortium, which is a branch of the World Academy of Art and Science, we invite you to work together with us to work with higher education to make the changes needed. I'd like to say that obviously the advent of the internet has made a fundamental change in higher education. I've worked with universities all over the world, and prior to the COVID experience, the pandemic, most faculty would have said that online education is inferior to face-to-face education. Ironically, as soon as COVID hit in 2019, 2020 actually, all of a sudden everyone had to switch to online education, and it became just as good. Overnight, within 24 hours, it became just as good. So we had a lot to learn, and actually the first efforts to use online education have not always been successful. But it has extended the reach. So a school like ASU, Arizona State, has over 130,000 students.
180,000 now.
Okay, 180,000.
With online, we're growing exponentially.
With the University of the People, 120,000, et cetera. I could cite institution after institution in the US and in other countries over 100,000. Still, it will not be enough to address the future needs, even at the current rate of college-going populations. So I'd like to invite you to think about how can we extend that to new populations. So I'd like to bifurcate it. In the developed countries, there is always the issue of the digital divide, that the wealthy institutions are going to be able to do more with technology, with AI, and we have seen that already happen, that many high schools do not prepare students well for higher education, so there is a lot of work to be done to expand the reach, to increase the number of enrollments, even in the developed world. But in the lesser developed world, the issue is much greater. So let me cite a statistic. In the US, there are about 12 to 15 million faculty. Let's just say 14, put it in the middle. It's about half and half full-time faculty, adjunct faculty. Now, you're a faculty member who has been trained in a discipline, and with a PhD typically, with a single discipline. You've not been trained to teach. You've not been trained to use AI. You've really not been trained to work with online education. So what do you have? You have a group of faculty largely suspicious about cheating with AI, about the implications of hallucinations and problems, and we are not going to be able to reach these new populations without training faculty in whole new areas. So I'd like to invite you to think about how might we really train the current generation and the next generation of faculty to use AI properly, because it is not going away and it will be, I believe, even more transformative than Google has or the internet has in the past 20 years. You look at the developing world, and I've worked in both Malawi and Kenya, where if you think about K-12 education, there is a shortage, a dramatic shortage of teachers. How are we going to reach them? How are we going to reach students? Primary education is about as much as students are able to go through with state support. You have to pay for high school education, let alone university education. I believe AI can provide tremendous opportunities for reaching new populations if done properly. And in the next round, I'll talk about ways of doing that. Finally, I'd like to say that we just can't take the current system, which has produced the problems that we currently have, and say that it's just going to expand and double, as Garry has mentioned. What really we need to think about is fundamentally changing the very concept. Think about it this way. Our current system at both K-12 and higher education is that all students can learn in 50-minute blocks. All students can learn with subject matters separated from one another. All students will be assessed by faculty who've had no training in assessment and who individually set their assessments, and that a grade of maybe 70% will be passing, maybe 65%, and you accumulate that over time. What you have is people with huge Swiss cheese gaps in their learning that you see as you go farther and farther along the educational system. Again, I'd like to submit that AI, and I'll talk about examples next round, I think can make a major difference in making this whole educational enterprise more interdisciplinary, more person-centered, and address the issue of more commonality of assessment to create higher standards of quality. So I think it's a very exciting time. I'd like to invite you to participate in changing that future, dealing with the issues that AI presents, but I think the opportunities are absolutely tremendous of expanding the use of AI in both the developed and the lesser developed world.
Ralph, thank you so much. I hope that by this time it's pretty obvious that the opportunities and the need in this country and all over the world, and of companies all over the world, this is relevant to all of us. But we haven't really covered the whole issue yet, or the whole opportunity, and we're going to hear about that as well. It reminded me when I heard Ralph, 20 years ago I did a study of Intel, and at a time when I think you'll agree technology was changing pretty rapidly at that time. Actually, 20 years ago, I'm saying it actually was 30 years ago, now that I think of it. And their main problem they were dealing with was that when the new students came in out of Stanford and Berkeley and other top schools in Silicon Valley, one of the big problems they dealt with was that the youth they had hired 5 or 10 years earlier, who were the leaders of the company, were already out of date. Those who had been working in the company for 20 years, 10 years, couldn't keep up with the changes in technology because their education had ended 10, 15 years earlier. And they said, how are we going to keep our workforce keeping pace with the rapid changes that are taking place? Well, when we look at the changes that were taking place in the 80s, and we think of what's happening now and the speed of change here, how much more difficult it is for those who are already in the workforce to keep pace with the changes that are coming every 6 months, every 3 months. We're all finding it difficult to keep up with what's going on. So when we talk about education, we're not just talking about the formal, structured system of educational institutions. Every company is an every company that wants to succeed and keep up is an educational institution and has responsibilities for a workforce to keep them learning and growing throughout life. And unless we're going to each fashion our own educational system, we don't have an educational system today that can meet the needs of everyone after they pass out. We really need what we call lifelong learning. And that's why we're so happy to have Unique with us, talking from experience. Talking from the experience of companies and business in Washington, D.C., in that area, and how they're trying to grapple with the challenge of what do we do with the workforce once we've got it, and how do we keep their development going, and how can technology help us do that? Unique?
Well, thank you, Gary, and greetings and good morning. Morning still, everyone. I love the analogy that you used about, the holes in Swiss cheese. And anyone knows a really good piece of Swiss cheese has some really decent size holes. Well, as many holes are there, the same number of responsibilities we have as global citizens to ensure that citizens of the world are prepared for the future of work. It is all of our responsibility to ensure that we have a strong labor market and that our population is prepared for change. And so I really look at what we're doing on the ground as opportunities to address some of these large gaping holes that exist. Technology has the ability to be one of the greatest disruptors of poverty. It also has the opportunity to be one of the, greatest disruptors to access and education. There are more cell phones and devices than there are teachers. Right? Think about it in a very practical way. And so I'm really honored to be on this innovative journey with organizations like Build Within, where we are taking technology and we are going to communities that don't have traditional access to maybe higher education or traditional learning opportunities, and bringing, powered by AI, micro learning opportunities to the people who need them the most. If you have an opportunity, I'd like to invite anyone who's here to visit our booth in the West Hall, where we have some apprentices. If are any of our apprentices here, can you raise your hand? We've got a few of our apprentices. So these young people, and I'm going to call them young people, have helped to build and code an AI-powered application that provides career coaching and job matching to other young people or other people. This is the sort of innovation that's going to help us address the issues around access to education and developing our workforce. Now, I can assure you we're doing it the right way and in a responsible way. I know there are still a lot of questions and apprehension about how we use AI. And so we're doing it the right way, a way that's inclusive and representative of the diverse communities that are actually utilizing the technology that we're building. But we are trying to disrupt poverty and create opportunities for micro learning. Let me give you a real life example. We have people whose jobs were forever lost because of the pandemic. Maybe they worked in hospitality or in other industries that were dramatically impacted. Day in and day out in my agency in the District of Columbia, at any given point in time, we could be providing services to a parent, a child, and a grandparent, all that have the same sorts of deficits, generations of people who have deficits and not the same skills that we need them to be to go out and work, in our labor market. And so we know when we're seeing generations, families, whole families, mother, grandmother, and child come in and get workforce development and upskilling training, you know that we have an issue when we see the same sort of deficits across generations. So we're using technology to address that. You can take training on your cell phone, right? You can come in person and do training. You can use a computer for longer lessons. The reality is that we've got to address this problem in a very different way, and we're working our hardest out here to do that. And so I'm really proud and excited about the work that we're doing, and again, I want to invite everyone to come out and visit us at our booth, see the young people who actually coded and built this program that, quite frankly, anybody in the world can use, and hopefully we'll be able to get it out to folks all over the world.
Unique, wonderful, thank you. What is the name of the booth?
317 in the 9317 in the West Hall. North Hall, thank you. We're in the West Hall, thank you.
9370.
Yes.
That's build with it.
It's Build Within.
Skills Nation.
Yep, Skills Nation, because one by one we're building the skills in this great nation, and soon we'll be able to do it all over the world.
Great. Okay, we've talked the big picture. Thank you so much. We've talked the big picture. Now let's zero in a little more about what technology has to do with all of this and how what's going on in the world. What are the opportunities? What is the indications that we can really solve this problem with technology? Let's zero in a little closer to it. Amanda, we know that technology is a double-edged sword. We know there's been, I think Ralph mentioned, there's been controversy about it up until now. We don't want to overlook the problems that are there. We want to deal with them. But tell me, what's the experience at ASU about how the technology, how do you see this technology being positioned in the future to really transform and multiply and scale, make this education, you're scaling, right? You're answering the question. It shows that with the right technology, we can scale the system at a fraction of the cost of the old way. Please, tell us more.
Thank you, Garry. And ASU actually has a couple of global educational initiatives to scale. One is our University Design Institute, and another is Sintana, which helps work with universities all around the world, and those universities are powered by ASU. Individuals get an AI-powered chatbot as a tutor, but you mentioned some of the negatives that we need to be thinking about head on, and that's the issue of ethics. You know, when you're looking at AI, it's gathering up all the data and then giving you answers. So you need to make sure that there is an element to screen out disinformation. And we have a partnership with OpenAI. It's the first university partnership with OpenAI. And we have a whole lot of ethicists who are working on trying to eliminate bias within the data sets that are being used. So it's a closed system with agents, and we see more of that developing in the future. But this whole idea of principled innovation is in fact one of our 6 deliberate pillars of AI development. Second big issue, and this applies to all of us in the room, is thinking about where our energy comes from. You will have seen over the last few months that AI requires massive amounts of energy in its current form. And perhaps that's an opportunity to spur innovation, whether it's for clean types of fission. Nuclear fusion has had some breakthroughs, and we know geothermal is only 1% of global energy. It could be 20% clean baseload. There's a whole lot of opportunity, I think, for you in the business world to think about how we solve that particular problem. There's also the issue of connectivity. 700 million people don't have access to the internet, and while there are more devices than teachers in the world, there are still a whole lot of people who don't have devices who could use those as opportunities. So massive amounts of business opportunity. I wanted to give just 2 very quick examples of how we're using AI as a teaching tool. One quick one. So Climate Trace, a global consortium that we're part of, and it's helping educate everybody, including policymakers, on emissions around the world. climatetrace.org, look it up, better on a computer.
Thank you. Ralph, in your presentation, you touched a couple of very interesting issues. One was not only about the quantitative scaling with AI, but about the change in pedagogy and the type of education. And you seem to be saying maybe it can even do it better than the traditional system. Tell us something more about the application of AI, what's going on, and where you see it can help us.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say that machine learning or reading has been going on for a long time. Anyone who's taken the graduate record exam for over 25 years, it's been machine read. The SAT, the ACT, the essays. So AI is an augmentation of this, and I think has enormous potential. So we've been doing work and to learn more about Khan Academy, which if any of you have kids, I'm sure they're using. That is a wonderful opportunity, and doing work with Khan Amigo to bring AI into. I'd like to say that it is a whole nother way of inviting curiosity with students. And we need to, as a former dean of education, we need to train teachers how to use pedagogy. Secondly, we need more problem-based learning at all levels. There is a tremendous gap in meaning and involvement or engagement of students who are now using AI to read their assignments because they're disengaged. And we need to move from single space or single discipline to problem-based learning, which has been demonstrated time and again. Thirdly, I would just say we need to use person-based and adaptive learning that takes each student with her learning opportunities, and to build, and AI can build more learning approaches. Khan Amigo, Khan Academy is doing that. ASU is doing a lot of that. I work with a startup that assesses all faculty grading to assure consistency across. I think there are all kinds of new ways that are doing that. And we're going to need that to reach the populations all over the world at all levels.
Thank you. Unique, you're going to have the last word on this. Tell us something else. What can we talk about to companies in the room about the opportunities that are there, and how can we help them? What are the ways that they can take more advantage of this?
Sure. So for businesses that are interested in improving the current skill set of their employees, or even trying to attract new talent to their workforce, I think technology provides, specifically AI, a lot of opportunities to help people scale up and bring in qualified candidates. AI can help screen out bias, and future talent recruitment efforts just by creating question sets that are inclusive. So when I talked about responsibly using AI and ethics, I also mean it being culturally responsive, having people who are representative of our population coding and building UI, unemployment insurance. That's my other hat that I wear as Labor Secretary in the District of Columbia. But really the bottom line is embrace innovation, embrace change, and get ready to use AI because it's here to stay.
Brilliant.
Final, just closing statement. What can companies do that really want to, apart from dealing with their own workforce, where do you see some of the opportunities for companies to go and reach out and become educational providers? Not just that they need it, yes, but they can provide it.
So there are a lot of amazing organizations. I'll just highlight one that we've brought on, Build Within, Dr. Jimena Harstock Gates, who is leading this global effort to upskill people at all skill levels. So the idea is to meet someone where they're at. So it's human-centered. It is multidisciplinary, but to work with organizations who have a specialty in innovation, embrace innovation, and I would say it's not hard to seek out and find groups who have specialized in this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to terrific panel, and let's give them a hand. Thank you.